The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about the whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed.
Thank you, Joyce. In a normal year, whatever that is, Bill Henry and I would be taking off after worship today to head for Presbyterian Synod School in the wilderness of Iowa. It is not a time of rest because there is so much to engage in, but it has always been a time of restoration for me. One of my Synod School memories involves a minister from Canada who used to attend regularly. Chris is a gifted storyteller. So when a small group of us gathered each year, Chris would often tell us a story, either from his own life or something he made up. One year he allowed us to challenge him by giving him 5 or so random words that he would then incorporate into a story. I can't remember all the words, but bowler hat and mac and cheese were among them. Chris wove an incredible tale. Today, there are several words that have come to the surface of my consciousness that are wanting to be included in today's sermon. Rest, restoration, interruption, compassion, sheep, healing, and a church coffee. Perhaps not completely random, but still a challenge. In the gospel story, Jesus' disciples have just returned from arduous journeys, fulfilling their mission of teaching, healing, and generally sharing the good news of God's love. Jesus' reputation was spreading so quickly and widely that they could barely find time to eat. Everyone wanted a piece of them and what they were sharing. What a relief it must have been to hear Jesus recommend a time away for rest and restoration. Vacation time at last. From the genesis of time and in the genesis of Scripture, Sabbath time has been built into the system. On the 7th day you shall rest, God commanded. So we are told, but struggle to do. When I was growing up, Sunday afternoons might include a meal and a visit in someone else's home, but just as often it involved a quiet afternoon with a good book. And what a blessed time that was. It's a challenge to make time for rest and restoration. There are incessant emails to answer, text messages and electronic notices that don't care what they interrupt. For some, there are never-ending commitments to sports practices, games, or lessons, or children who need something just when you think you're about to get a break. Work demands ooze into supposed personal time. And the news feeds never stop, taking up space in our days and in our brains. Jesus knew the value of taking time away. He is recorded as having done it regularly. But even Jesus and his crew had trouble getting away from it all for even a little time. I mean, he had a good idea. Let's take a boat and go to a deserted place. A deserted place, a wilderness, free of distractions and the needs of the mass of humanity. There wasn't social media then. No one tweeted Jesus' next location, but they might just as well have. The word spread so fast that the people with their needs arrived before Jesus. An interruption in the plan for rest. Perhaps Jesus failed to recall that the wilderness is often correlated with struggle and testing. Remember the 40-year exodus of the people of Israel and Jesus' own 40 days in the wilderness? But in the wilderness, as in all places, God is known to provide. In this case, the image of God, which is thoroughly present in Jesus, shines through in the compassion Jesus feels and exhibits. Now, compassion is an interesting word. It's not about pity. It's not condescending or patronizing. Compassion is suffering with. In German, the word translated as compassion is Mitleid, or literally with sorrow. Jesus was able to enter into the pain, the sorrow, and suffering of the people who surrounded him. Some of the most compassionate people I've known in my life have been dogs. Dogs who seem to naturally tune into what's going on with their human companion. Now, I know this is not the Blessing of the Animals Day, but I can't help but draw on the stories of remarkable four-footed friends. My own Dalmatian was often somewhat neurotic, but also attentive. He slept on the floor next to my bed, partly so that I could easily resituate his blanket when it fell off and left him in the cold, and partly because he knew I needed him to be there. An even greater canine story of compassion is the story of Cheyenne, which I may have shared before, and I'll probably share it again. Cheyenne is a big, fluffy Samoyed, or Samoyed, depending on how you pronounce it, who belonged to one of my minister friends from Synod School. Ken would take Cheyenne on hospital and other pastoral visits. One day at the hospital, the staff asked if he could take Cheyenne to see a young patient who had been burned severely and who had not spoken for weeks since the fire. Cheyenne situated himself right next to the child and waited patiently. The staff helped to place the child's hand on the gentle dog. Soon the child was slightly stroking Cheyenne, and then, to everyone's surprise, the child spoke. "Soft, doggy," she said. This is compassion, just a willingness to be with someone who is suffering. Compassion, or suffering love, is at the center of the image of God, which, by the way, we also bear. Jewish writer Abraham Heschel writes in the Prophets that God is moved and affected by what happens in the world. God is concerned about the world and shares its fate. Indeed, this is the essence of God's moral nature, God's willingness to be intimately involved in the history of humankind. As bearers of God's image, compassion is built into Jesus and our natures as well. It is at the core of every major world religion, and it is the essence of Jesus' ministry. Jesus sees the flock of people who have come to see him as being like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, recognizes that the people, though they may already be people of faith, are searching and have felt aimless in their seeking for some sort of living water that will refresh their bodies and souls. As sheep, we need guidance, caring words and touch, a source of healing. We need to be drawn into the safety and the companionship of the fold. At times, we may feel like sheep in search of a shepherd, especially during COVID time. The sheep who wanted to meet Jesus were so desperate that they beat Jesus to his location. How often do you see folks so desperate to get to church that they rush to make sure they get a spot, physically or online? We may have great needs, but the urgency seems often to be lost in the thick of overwhelming distractions and interruptions. Are we overwhelmed by the needs of the world, the people and the planet? Are we overwhelmed by the needs of the church, within the building and among the people? Is it possible to have times of rest and renewal and to be a people and place of compassion? Ideally, the church is a place of restoration and compassion and community, which allows me to work on my final word or words in the list that I started out with, church coffee. Tom Long, a well-known teacher of preaching, tells the story of a young Jewish man who accuses his father of hypocrisy. His father is agnostic, but faithfully attends temple. His father responds, "There are many reasons to go to temple. Take Goldman. He comes to talk to God. Me? Well, I come to talk to Goldman." Kay Lynn Northcutt, who is a teacher at Aquinas Institute of Theology, reflects on this story as she discovers that one of the primary reasons people gather on Sunday mornings is for community, and hopefully to talk and listen to God too. As we moved past the 1-year mark of online worship services, Northcutt says, she woke up one Sunday morning and cried out, "I want church coffee." It wasn't that the coffee was so fantastic. It was that she missed sitting down with other churchgoers and maybe talking about God, and for sure talking about their personal lives and current affairs and church building repairs and how COVID was handled. When we are like sheep without a shepherd, we need our fellow sheep as well as the shepherd. The Minucha Retreat Center in Corbett, Oregon, includes in their purpose statements the following: we believe that people are better emotionally, spiritually, and physically when they are gathered into loving and nurturing communities. The church itself gives us the divine embrace that we ache to receive. When we live out our faith in community, we are shepherds to one another. During the soon-to-be year-and-a-half slog through this pandemic, we have had to find new ways to be the church to one another and the world, to offer both rest and compassion. I doubt that any of us had prepared ourselves to live through a plague. Somehow, when we first went into lockdown, I thought that I would suddenly have more time to rest, to read, to regroup. And I believe some folks did find that to be true. But for many of us, it has felt like we have been running a marathon. I want to read parts of an essay that Pastor Jenny Smith wrote in a recent blog post. She likens the past 16 plus months to being in a marathon. And just when you think you are near the end, with the church building beginning to open up again, bam, you find an official-looking race organizer has slapped another number on your back and pushed you toward another starting line that mysteriously appeared. Smith reflects, as the gears come to life in our faith communities, we have the opportunity to tell the truth, to slow the pace, and question everything as we enter the new normal. Yes, our second marathon has begun, ready or not. Problem is, our bodies are still recovering from the first marathon. Maybe the answer is to stop running the second race. What if we looked at each other and gently nodded, slowed our forced jog, and started walking together? What if we walked our second marathon, side by side, no racing, no competing with anything or anyone, resting when it's time to rest, saying yes to a new idea when it glistens with possibility, saying no when something feels too heavy, asking new questions in places we assumed the old answer, giving others permission to rest because we choose rest, questioning the speed at which we live and move, loving people with beautiful boundaries in place, taking a nap, going to therapy or spiritual direction because we're all human, breathing deeply of God's grace and love and restoration. Maybe this is how we disrupt the deeply ingrained oppressive realities of our world. We choose to walk together. Walking together. Where do you find yourself in today's story? Are you in need of a time of rest and restoration along with Jesus and his disciples? Do you find that need interrupted by the demands of life? Are you among the flock that swarms around Jesus, desperate for healing and wholeness? Are you filled with compassion and able to pause to care for those in need of a healing presence? time apart, and acts of compassion are both elements of our faith. It is a both and proposition that requires balance, insight, discernment, care, and prayer. Without attending to our emotional and spiritual needs, we cannot attend to the needs of justice and healing to which we are called. As the church, we are called to attend to our own needs for rest and to the needs of others for healing and restoration. Jesus has compassion for all, those who need a break and those who need a time of healing or teaching. As the church, we can be the fringe of Jesus' cloak. We can be a healing place and a place apart. We can be a place where you can be who you are. You can reveal your authentic self and dare to be vulnerable among caring souls. We can live into the compassionate image of God, which we bear within us. We are not sheep without a shepherd. God, through the living Christ, is with us. May our compassionate God of the Sabbath guide us, refresh us, and fill us with love. Amen.